The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles beneath a dome of pure starlight, where representatives from 437 species gathered to maintain the peace that had lasted for over 3,000 years. Ambassador Reed walked slowly across the polished floor, his simple gray suit looking plain among the brilliant colors and exotic forms of his fellow diplomats. The human delegation consisted of just 3 people, carrying nothing but a small case of cultural gifts and Reed's worn leather briefcase containing humanity's peaceful proposals. Most species barely notice the humans anymore. They have been part of the Council for 2 centuries now, classified as a Tier 7 pacifist species in the official records. Their 12 worlds produce some of the galaxy's most beautiful art, music that can make even the coldest species weep, and poetry that translated across the most alien minds. When conflict arose between other species, humans often served as mediators, their calm voices and gentle wisdom helping to resolve disputes that might otherwise lead to war. Reed took his place at the small human podium, dwarfed by the massive structures that housed the more militaristic species. The Galactic Council meeting was routine today, mostly trade disputes and resource allocation discussions. Humanity had requested just 5 minutes to present their latest culture exchange program, offering to share their newest musical compositions with any species interested in expanding their artistic understanding. 3 sectors away from the council chambers, Overlord Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical displays that showed human space in perfect detail. The hegemony had been watching humanity for months now, and their intelligence reports painted a picture of remarkable weakness. 12 worlds, barely 40 billion inhabitants total, with no standing military beyond basic security forces armed with simple energy, weapons designed more for crowd control than warfare. Kane was a massive creature, his species having evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived. His 6 arms moved constantly across the control panels, each hand equipped with natural claws that could tear through steel. The hegemony represented 6 species bound together by their shared belief that strength determined right, and the strong had both the privilege and responsibility to rule over the weak. They controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy through conquest and intimidation, their fleets striking fear into civilizations that had forgotten what real war looked like. "Show me the human defenses again," Kane commanded, his voice carrying a natural growl that made smaller species tremble. The tactical display shifted to show the human colonies in detail. Each world had a small orbital station, maybe 50 ships total for their entire civilization, and ground installations that looked more like museums than military bases. Their largest vessels appeared to be cargo ships and passenger transports, with what the hegemony classified as decorative weapon systems that wouldn't pose a threat to even their lightest scouts. General Vex, Kane's chief military advisor, clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his insectoid species. "The humans have actually requested a meeting with us, Overlord. They wish to discuss what they call cultural exchange and mutual understanding." The general's translator rendered his words with barely concealed contempt. Their ambassador sent a formal invitation along with samples of their art and music, suggesting we might find common ground through shared appreciation of beauty. Kane studied a human gift that lay on a command table, a small crystalline sculpture that seemed to capture starlight and bend it into impossible patterns. According to the accompanying note, it represented humanity's hope for peace between all species. The Overlord picked up the delicate artwork and crushed it slowly in one massive hand, letting the fragments fall to the deck. "They mock us with their weakness," he said. "They offer us toys where we could take everything they have with a single battle group." The strategic value of human space was obvious to any military mind. Their 12 worlds sat along major trade routes, and their systems contained rare elements essential for advanced technology. More importantly, their territory could serve as a perfect staging ground for future hegemony expansion into the galactic core. The humans had built their colonies in ideal defensive positions, though they seemed completely unaware of the tactical advantages they possessed. "The other species watch us, Overlord," Vex reminded him. "Many still remember the old wars before the Great Peace. If we move against the humans without provocation, some might unite against us." The general's compound eyes reflected the tactical displays, calculating odds and possibilities. "But if the humans refuse our reasonable demands, if they force us to take action to protect our legitimate interests. Kane's predatory grin revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. Send the demand. Full territorial surrender, immediate evacuation of all military personnel, and unrestricted access to their resources and infrastructure. Give them 48 hours to comply. He gestured toward the remains of the human sculpture. If they want to play at diplomacy, let them learn what real power looks like. Back in the council chambers, Ambassador Reed was finishing his presentation about humanity's newest symphony, a piece inspired by the sounds of solar winds and cosmic radiation that could only be properly appreciated by species with certain auditory ranges. The response was typically polite, with several delegations expressing interest in cultural exchanges. Reed smiled and thanked his colleagues, gathering his materials and preparing to return to the human embassy. He never received Kane's ultimatum. The hegemony chose to deliver their demands directly to Earth, broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. The message was simple and brutal. Surrender everything or face complete destruction. No negotiation, no compromise, no possibility of peaceful resolution. Reed learned about it from his aide, who burst into his office with tears streaming down her face. "They want everything, Ambassador," she whispered. "Our worlds, our people, our entire civilization. They're giving us 2 days to abandon everything we've ever built." The young woman handed him the recorded message, her hands shaking. "They say if we resist, they'll make an example of us that the galaxy will never forget." Reed played the message 3 times, his face growing paler with each repetition. Kane's image filled the screen, surrounded by the battle flags of 6 conquered civilizations. The Overlord's words left no room for misunderstanding. Humanity would surrender or humanity would die. There would be no mercy for resistance, no quarter given to civilians, no respect for the laws of war that had governed galactic conflicts for millennia. Within hours, the human government had convened in emergency session. 12 worlds, 40 billion people, centuries of peaceful development, all threatened by creatures who saw mercy as weakness and art as mockery. The debate lasted 18 hours, with every option explored and every possibility considered. Some argued for surrender, hoping that submission might save lives. Others proposed fleeing to distant systems, abandoning everything but preserving the species. Ambassador Reed stood before the emergency assembly and spoke the words that seal humanity's fate. "We have spent 200 years proving that civilization is possible, that intelligence can triumph over brutality, that beauty has value beyond conquest." His voice carried the weight of every human who had ever chosen creation over destruction. "We cannot simply hand over everything we are to creatures who crush art in their hands and call it weakness." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not surrender. Kane received the human response exactly 47 hours and 33 minutes after his ultimatum. Reed's image appeared on his command screen, the human ambassador looking tired but determined. "Overlord Kane, the human species respectfully declines your demands. We cannot surrender our homes and our people to those who would destroy everything we have built. Instead, we offer once again to share our culture, our art, our music, and our friendship. We believe that understanding between species is always possible." The transmission ended with Reed offering a new gift, a recording of human children singing a lullaby that their mothers had sung for 1,000 generations. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, filled with hope and innocence and the simple faith that tomorrow would be better than today. Kane listened to the entire song, his expression never changing. When it finished, he turned to his fleet commanders and spoke 4 words that would echo through galactic history. Kill them all. The Hegemony War Fleet was already in position, 600 ships carrying the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. They had been watching human space for months, mapping every defense, cataloging every weakness, preparing for this moment. The attack would begin simultaneously across all 12 human worlds, orbital bombardments, followed by ground assault, designed to leave nothing alive and nothing standing. As the fleet moved toward human space, Kane stood on his bridge and watched the stars shift past his view screen. Soon there would be one less species cluttering up the galaxy, one less voice calling for peace when strength was what mattered. The humans had made their choice, and now they would learn what that choice cost. Behind him, The tactical displays showed human space growing larger, 12 small lights that would soon be extinguished forever. Kane felt no regret, no doubt, no question about the rightness of his actions. This was how the galaxy worked, how it had always worked before the weak species convinced themselves that peace was possible. The humans were about to discover that some things never changed, and the strong still ruled the weak, no matter how beautiful their songs might be. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the observation deck of Research Station Prometheus, watching the distant lights of his home galaxy through the reinforced viewport. The station hung in the empty space between star systems, 50 light-years beyond the official borders of human territory. For 3 years, Webb and his team of researchers had been conducting what their government called deep space cultural analysis, studying the patterns of galactic civilization from the safety of absolute isolation. The 50 people aboard Prometheus were not typical researchers. Webb himself had spent 20 years as a military strategist before becoming a xenobiologist. His chief engineer, Tom Rivera, had designed weapon systems before switching to what he called peaceful applications of destructive technology. Dr. Anna Brooks claimed to study alien psychology for cultural exchange purposes, but her real expertise lay in understanding how different species made war and what they feared most. Captain Lisa Stone commanded the station's small security force, though her background included tours with Earth's most elite military units during the brief border conflicts of the previous century. Every person aboard had been carefully selected not just for their scientific knowledge, but for skills that peaceful humanity preferred to keep hidden from itself and from the galaxy that watched them so carefully. The morning routine on Prometheus was interrupted by an urgent signal from the long-range communication array. Webb rushed to the command center, where his communications officer was staring at multiple screens with horror written across her face. "Doctor, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from all 12 homeworlds," she whispered. "The signals are their distress calls." Webb activated the main display and watched as the nightmare unfolded across human space. The hegemony fleet had struck without warning, appearing simultaneously in orbit around every human world. The first wave was pure destruction, orbital bombardments that turned cities into craters and reduced centuries of human achievement to radioactive ash. The second wave was worse. Ground forces landed while the bombardments continued, but these were not simple military operations designed to secure territory. The attacking forces were hunting civilians, herding survivors into collection points where they were systematically tortured and executed. The broadcast that reached Prometheus carried the screams of human children, the desperate pleas of parents trying to protect their families, and the cruel laughter of alien soldiers who found entertainment in human suffering. Webb watched his homeworld die through the cold eye of deep space sensors. Earth's great cities vanished under nuclear fire, while landing craft disgorged thousands of hegemony troops who spread across the planet like a plague. The human security forces fought back with their simple weapons, but they might as well have been throwing stones at armored vehicles. Within 6 hours, organized resistance had collapsed on every world. "They're broadcasting it," Dr. Brooks said, her voice hollow with shock. "The hegemony is transmitting the executions across the galaxy, showing what happens to species that refuse their demands." She pulled up intercepts of alien communication channels, where other species were watching humanity's destruction with a mixture of horror and relief that it wasn't happening to them. The torture sessions were being recorded in detail, with hegemony interrogators extracting information about human culture, psychology, and biology through methods that violated every law of civilized warfare. They weren't just killing humans. They were studying them as they died, learning everything about human weaknesses and fears for future reference. Captain Stone stood behind Webb, her hands clenched into fists as she watched alien soldiers drag human families from burning buildings. "The Galactic Council," she said through gritted teeth, "they have to respond to this. This violates every treaty, every law, every principle they claim to uphold." Webb pulled up the Council communication channels and found his answer in the official response that had been broadcast just hours earlier. The Council expressed deep regret for the unfortunate situation in human space, but noted that the hegemony's actions were technically legal under galactic law, since humanity had refused legitimate demands for territorial adjustment. The message went on to remind all species that peaceful resolution was always preferable to military confrontation. "They're calling it territorial adjustment, Webb said, his voice deadly quiet. 8 billion people dead, and they're filing it under acceptable losses in a property dispute. He turned to face his team, seeing his own rage reflected in their faces. The galaxy is watching our children burn, and they're taking notes for their historical records. Tom Rivera was monitoring the technical aspects of the attack, analyzing the weapons being used and the tactics being employed. They're not just killing efficiently, he reported. They're taking their time, making it hurt. The hegemony could last all 12 worlds in an hour, but they're stretching out over days. He paused, checking his instruments. They want the galaxy to see every detail, to understand what happens when you refuse them. Dr. Brooks had been analyzing the psychological warfare aspects of the broadcast executions. They're targeting families specifically, she said, making parents watch their children die, forcing siblings to choose who lives and who dies first. They're not just committing genocide. They're perfecting it, turning it into an art form designed to break the spirit of anyone who might resist them in the future. Webb walked back to the observation deck, staring out at the stars that no longer seemed beautiful or peaceful. Behind him, his team continued their analysis, documenting every atrocity, cataloging every violation, recording every detail of humanity's final hours. The professional part of his mind noted that they were gathering invaluable intelligence about hegemony capabilities and methods. The human part of his mind simply screamed. By the third day, the broadcast from human space had stopped. The hegemony had completed their demonstration, leaving 12 dead worlds as monuments to their power. The official casualty reports would list 8.7 billion humans killed, with no survivors detected by long-range sensors. The galaxy began the process of updating their star charts, removing human colonies from the official records, and reassigning the territory to hegemony control. Overlord Kane appeared on galactic communication channels to deliver a speech about the unfortunate necessity of his actions. He spoke of humanity's stubborn refusal to accept reality, their naive belief that art and music could substitute for military strength. The hegemony, he explained, had simply provided a valuable lesson to the galaxy about the consequences of refusing legitimate authority. Webb gathered his team in the main conference room, where the silence stretched for several minutes before anyone spoke. They were the last humans in the galaxy, 50 people who had survived only because they happened to be in the right place when their species was erased from existence. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on them like a physical force. "We have a choice to make," Webb finally said. "We can try to hide, find some distant system where we can preserve what's left of human culture and maybe rebuild over centuries." He paused, looking at each face around the table. "Or we can do something else." Captain Stone was the first to respond. "They made a mistake," she said simply. "The hegemony thinks they killed all of us, which means they're not watching for survivors. They think the threat is over, that they can go back to normal operations." Her smile was cold and predatory. "They have no idea what they just created." Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. "We spend decades studying alien psychology, learning how different species think and what motivates them. We always use that knowledge for peaceful purposes, for building bridges and finding common ground." She gestured toward the displays, still showing the aftermath of human genocide. But the same knowledge that helps you understand someone can also help you destroy them. Tom Rivera had been quiet during the discussion, but now he leaned forward with a strange light in his eyes. "We always held ourselves back," he said. "Human technology, human weapons, human tactics. We always designed them with limitations, with safety protocols, with ethical constraints." He pulled up technical specifications on his tablet. "We never built anything designed purely to kill because we believed killing was wrong." Webb understood what his team was telling him, and the understanding filled him with a mixture of horror and satisfaction that scared him more than anything the hegemony had done. "They wanted to see what humans become when we stop pretending to be civilized," he said. "They wanted to strip away our ethics, our morality, our belief in the value of life." The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. The hegemony had murdered 8.7 billion humans to make a point about strength versus weakness. In doing so, they had created something that had never existed before. Humans with nothing left to lose, no civilization to protect, no moral constraints to observe, and no reason to show mercy to anyone. The old humanity died with our worlds, Webb continued. We're what's left, 50 people who remember what we used to be but are no longer bound by what we used to believe. He looked around the table one more time. We can't bring back our families, our friends, our civilization, but we can make sure the creatures who kill them understand exactly what they've done. Captain Stone spoke the words that would haunt the galaxy for years to come. They think they won because they're stronger than us. Let's show them what we become when we stop caring about being stronger. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. Let's show them what we become when we just want them to suffer. Webb nodded slowly, feeling something fundamental shift inside him, something that had held him back his entire life finally breaking free. The last 50 humans in the galaxy had just made a decision that would change everything. Though the hegemony wouldn't understand that for months to come. They had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen before, something that had been sleeping inside humanity for thousands of years, kept in check by civilization and morality and hope for a better future. Now those constraints were gone, burned away with the worlds that had created them, leaving behind something pure and terrible and absolutely without mercy. The monster was awake, and it was very, very angry. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in what had once been the station's cultural research lab, now transformed into something that would have horrified the peaceful humans who had built Prometheus. The walls were covered with detailed biological charts showing the internal anatomy of 6 different alien species, each diagram marked with precise notations about vulnerable points, pain receptors, and optimal methods of causing maximum suffering with minimum effort. 3 months had passed since the genocide, and the 50 survivors had spent every waking hour studying their enemies with the same dedication they had once applied to understanding art and music. The difference was that their new research had only one purpose: learning exactly how to make the hegemony species suffer in ways their evolution had never prepared them to endure. Captain Lisa Stone entered the lab carrying a datapad filled with intercepted hegemony communications. "They're getting comfortable," she reported, her voice carrying a satisfaction that would have chilled her former colleagues. "Security is down to minimum levels across their forward bases, and they're treating our former territory like conquered space that needs no further attention." Webb nodded without looking up from a microscopic analysis he was conducting on tissue samples they had collected from hegemony diplomatic visits years earlier. Every species in the galaxy had participated in cultural exchanges with humanity, unknowingly providing biological intelligence that peaceful researchers had filed away for academic purposes. Now that same information was being weaponized with surgical precision. Cain's species has a particular weakness in their nervous system, Webb said, adjusting the microscope settings. Their pack hunter evolution gave them enhanced reflexes, but also created a feedback loop in their pain receptors. If you stimulate the right nerve clusters, their own enhanced senses become a weapon against them. He made notes on his tablet, calculations that would have seemed innocent to any observer who didn't understand their true purpose. Tom Rivera worked at a fabrication station that had been designed to create cultural artifacts for diplomatic gifts. Now it produced devices that looked harmless but contained technology that could rewrite biological systems at the cellular level. His latest creation appeared to be a simple metallic sphere, no larger than a marble, but contained self-replicating nanobots programmed with modifications to human medical technology that had once been used to heal genetic disorders. The beautiful thing about medical nanobots, Rivera explained to his colleagues, is that they're designed to identify and modify biological systems without triggering immune responses. Change the programming just slightly, and instead of healing genetic damage, they can create it. He held up the sphere, watching it catch the light. One of these in a water supply can affect an entire planet within weeks, and the changes are permanent. Dr. Anna Brooks had converted the psychology lab into what she called her fear laboratory, where she studied the deepest cultural and biological terror responses of each hegemony species. Her research had uncovered psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited to drive entire civilizations to madness without firing a single shot. Cain's people evolved from pack hunters, she said, pulling up holographic displays of alien brain scans. Their entire social structure depends on clear hierarchy and group loyalty. But if you introduce specific neurochemical changes, you can make them literally unable to trust each other. She highlighted areas of alien brain anatomy with disturbing enthusiasm. They become paranoid, aggressive toward their own kind, incapable of cooperation. Their greatest strength becomes their greatest weakness. The research station had been divided into specialized sections, each focusing on a different aspect of what the survivors had begun calling biological warfare elevated to an art form. Every technique they developed was tested first in computer simulations, then refined through theoretical applications, and finally prepared for field deployment against targets they had selected with mathematical precision. Webb's team had identified 17 key hegemony installations that could be reached without detection, started with isolated research outposts and supply stations that would not be missed immediately. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, demonstrate to hegemony that their victory was not as complete as they believed, while simultaneously gathering intelligence and testing new weapons in real combat situations. The first target was Outpost 7, a hegemony research facility built on the ruins of what had once been a human agricultural colony. 50 alien scientists and security personnel worked there, studying human biology and culture for future reference, completely unaware that they were being studied in return by the last humans in the galaxy. Captain Stone led the infiltration team, moving through space in a modified cargo vessel that had been stripped of everything except stealth systems and the tools they would need for their work. The approach took 18 hours, drifting slowly toward the target, while passive sensors mapped every detail of the outpost defenses and internal structure. 27 soldiers, 23 researchers, Stone reported through encrypted communications. Standard hegemony security protocols, which means they're prepared for conventional attacks from known species using expected tactics. Her smile was invisible in the darkness of the cargo hold, but her team could hear it in her voice. They have no idea what humans can do when we stop playing by galactic rules. The attack began at exactly 0300 station time, when the alien guard would be at their lowest alertness level. Stone's team didn't use weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they released Rivera's nanobots into the facility's atmosphere circulation system, then settled back to watch as the hegemony's own biology turned against them. The nanobots had been programmed to target the specific neurochemical pathways that Dr. Brooks had identified in her psychological research. Within minutes, the alien guard began experiencing symptoms that their military training had never prepared them to handle. Fear responses triggered without external stimuli, pain receptors activated randomly, and social bonding mechanisms shut down completely. The security footage from Outpost 7 told a story that would have been impossible for any galactic intelligence service to understand. The guards turned on each other first, their enhanced paranoia making every shadow look like a threat, and every colleague appeared to be an enemy. Then the researchers began displaying behaviors that violated everything known about their species' psychology. Stone's team moved through the chaos like ghosts, not to kill but to observe and document. They recorded everything. How long each species took to break under psychological pressure, which techniques were most effective against different alien biologies, and what modifications would be needed for future operations. The insectoid species lasted longest, Stone reported as they prepared to leave the outpost. Their hive mind structure provided some resistance to individual psychological manipulation, but once we disrupted the chemical signals that maintained their collective consciousness, they became completely helpless. She paused to check her notes. The reptilian species broke fastest. Their predator psychology made them vulnerable to fear tactics that would be useless against herbivore species. When Outpost 7 stopped responding to communication attempts, Hegemony Command assumed it was a technical malfunction. The facility was too isolated and too unimportant to warrant immediate investigation. It would be weeks before anyone discovered what had actually happened there, and by then the humans would have struck 3 more targets using increasingly sophisticated methods. Webb monitored the operation from Prometheus, analyzing the biological data his team transmitted in real time. The nanobots exceeded performance expectations, he noted with scientific detachment. Cellular modification rate was 30% faster than simulated results, and the psychological effects lasted longer than predicted. He made adjustments to the programming for future deployments, improvements that would make the next attack even more effective. Dr. Brooks studied the psychological breakdown patterns with the same enthusiasm she had once reserved for peaceful cultural exchange. We're learning more about alien psychology from these operations than we did from decades of diplomatic contact, she observed. Fear strips away all the social conditioning and reveals a fundamental nature underneath. The second target was a supply convoy traveling between hegemony systems, carrying equipment and personnel to newly conquered human territory. Stone's team intercepted the convoy using techniques that appeared to be simple piracy, but the attack served multiple purposes beyond gathering supplies. "We need them to know we exist," Webb had explained during the planning session, "but we need them to underestimate what we are. Let them think we're desperate survivors using crude tactics. Let them believe they understand the threat we represent." The convoy attack was deliberately messy, using conventional weapons and tactics that any species might employ. Stone's team took what they needed and left the survivors with a message that seemed to be nothing more than human rage and desperation. The hegemony would analyze the attack and conclude that a few humans had somehow escaped the genocide and were now striking back with primitive resources. What the hegemony couldn't detect was the real purpose of the attack. Every surviving alien had been exposed to a new generation of nanobots, programmed not to cause immediate harm, but to remain dormant while transmitting biological data back to Prometheus. The humans now had real-time monitoring of hegemony physiology, tracking how their bodies responded to stress, fear, and various environmental factors. "They think they're dealing with terrorists," Stone reported after the successful convoy raid. "Their response protocols are designed for conventional threats using known tactics. They're increasing security and hunting for our base, but they're looking for the wrong things in the wrong places." The third attack targeted a communication relay station that served as a hub for hegemony intelligence operations. This time, the humans used no weapons at all. They simply introduced software modifications into the alien computer systems, changes so subtle that they would be undetectable for months while they gathered intelligence and prepared for larger operations. Webb watched the progress reports with growing satisfaction. Each successful operation provided more data about hegemony capabilities and weaknesses, while simultaneously demonstrating that humanity's extinction had been greatly exaggerated. More importantly, each attack was designed to make the aliens increasingly paranoid and uncertain about the nature of the threat they faced. "They're starting to realize that something survived," Webb said, reviewing intercepted hegemony communications. "But they still think in terms of conventional warfare and known threats. They're looking for hidden colonies, secret weapons, surviving military units." He smiled with predatory satisfaction. "They have no idea they're dealing with 50 people who have abandoned every principle that once made us human." 6 months after the genocide, Overlord Kane stood in his command center staring at reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare and conquest. 17 hegemony installations had gone silent over the past 3 months, and the pattern of destruction defied every tactical manual the species had written during their rise to galactic dominance. "Show me the Outpost 7 recordings again," Kane commanded, his 6 arms moving restlessly across the control surfaces. The holographic display activated, showing security footage from the final hours of the research facility. What Kane saw violated everything he understood about how conflicts were supposed to unfold. The hegemony soldiers in the footage were not dying from weapon fire or explosive devices. Instead, they appeared to be turning on each other with increasing savagery, their own enhanced combat instincts becoming weapons of self-destruction. Scientists who had worked together for years suddenly began attacking their colleagues with laboratory equipment, while security guards opened fire on their own squad members. General Vex studied the biological analysis reports with growing unease. "The autopsies show extensive neurochemical modifications," he reported, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Something altered their brain chemistry at the cellular level, but our medical teams cannot identify any known toxin or biological weapon." He paused, consulting additional data. The modifications appear to be permanent and irreversible. Kane's tactical advisors had spent weeks analyzing the attack patterns, trying to identify the enemy they were facing. The strikes seemed random at first, but closer examination revealed a terrifying level of strategic planning. Every target had been selected for maximum intelligence value, while maintaining complete operational security for the attackers. They know our deployment schedules, reported Commander Zach, Kane's intelligence chief. The convoy attacks happen exactly when our ships are most vulnerable, and they always target the vessels carrying the most sensitive equipment. His reptilian features showed an expression that Kane had never seen before: fear. Someone is feeding them real-time intelligence about our operations. The most disturbing aspect of the attacks was their evolution over time. The early strikes had seemed crude and desperate, the work of survivors using primitive tactics to strike back at their conquerors. But each subsequent attack showed improvements in technique and sophistication that suggested rapid learning and adaptation. "Look at the timeline," General Vex said, pulling up a tactical display that showed progression of attacks over 6 months. The first strike used conventional explosives and basic infiltration methods. By the 5th attack, they were using biological weapons we cannot identify. By the 10th, they had developed psychological warfare techniques that drive our people insane without causing physical damage. Kane studied the progression with growing alarm. His species had conquered 47 different civilizations during their expansion across the galaxy, and every enemy had followed predictable patterns. Defeated species either surrendered completely or fought back using known military tactics. They did not evolve new forms of warfare in real time while conducting operations. The latest intelligence reports painted an even more disturbing picture. Hegemony personnel throughout the occupied territories were beginning to show signs of psychological breakdown that could not be attributed to combat stress. Soldiers were reporting nightmares about humans they had never encountered, while researchers were developing phobias about their own work that made them unable to function. It started with the convoy's survivors. Dr. Mole explained during the briefing. She was a Hegemony's chief medical officer, responsible for analyzing the biological aspects of the human resistance. Every person who survived a human attack has shown progressive neurological changes over the following weeks. She displayed brain scans that showed alien neural pathways literally rewiring themselves. They are becoming afraid of things that should not frighten trained military personnel. The fear was spreading through the Hegemony ranks like a plague. Soldiers who had never encountered humans directly were beginning to display the same symptoms as those who had survived attacks. The mere knowledge that humans were still alive and striking back seemed to be triggering psychological responses that military training could not overcome. Kane's own nightmares had begun 3 weeks earlier. He found himself dreaming about human children singing the lullaby that Ambassador Reed had transmitted before the genocide. In his dreams, the children's voices grew louder and more distorted until they became screams of rage that followed him into his waking hours. "The humans are not fighting us," General Vex observed during a private meeting with Kane. "They are changing us, making us into something we were never meant to be." His insectoid features twitched with nervous energy. "Our soldiers report feeling emotions that our species should not be capable of experiencing. Guilt, remorse, empathy for our victims." The psychological warfare was only one aspect of the human campaign. The biological attacks had grown increasingly sophisticated, with nanobots that could target specific genetic markers within individual species. Kane's medical staff had identified 17 different types of microscopic weapons, each designed to exploit a particular vulnerability in hegemony biology. Tom Rivera's latest creations were works of art in their precision and cruelty. The nanobots could remain dormant for months before activating, spreading through entire populations before beginning their work. Some caused physical pain that increased over time until victims begged for death. Others triggered hormonal changes that made aggressive species become passive and docile. "They are not trying to kill us quickly," Dr. Mole reported with barely controlled terror. "The modifications are designed to maximize suffering while keeping us alive long enough to spread the infection to others." She pulled up medical charts showing progression of symptoms. The nanobots are learning from each deployment, becoming more effective with every generation. The most terrifying discovery came from the analysis of captured human technology. The devices looked innocent, often resembling the cultural artifacts that humans had once traded throughout the galaxy. But each one contained innovations that the Hegemony's best scientists could not duplicate or fully understand. "They have advanced beyond their previous technological level," reported Chief Engineer Rack. The energy systems alone represent at least a century of development beyond what humans possessed before the war. He gestured toward a display, showing microscopic machinery. These nanobots are more sophisticated than anything in our arsenal. Kane realized that the humans were not just fighting back. They were evolving in real time, using the knowledge they gained from each attack to develop new weapons and tactics. The 50 survivors had somehow compressed centuries of military development into 6 months of focused research and application. The psychological pressure on hegemony forces was beginning to affect military effectiveness across the entire occupied region. Soldiers were requesting transfers away from former human territory, while officers reported increasing difficulty maintaining discipline among troops who jumped at shadows and saw threats in every civilian population. They have turned our own strength against us, Kane admitted during a command meeting that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Our enhanced senses make us more vulnerable to their psychological weapons. Our aggressive instincts become self-destructive when they trigger the wrong neurochemical responses. The Galactic Council had begun receiving reports about the deteriorating situation in former human space, but their response was limited to expressions of concern and requests for more information. Most species viewed the conflict as an internal hegemony matter, a minor insurgency that would be resolved through conventional military methods. The Council thinks we are exaggerating the threat, General Vex reported after returning from diplomatic meetings. They believe we are facing a few dozen human survivors using desperate tactics. His mandibles clicked with dark amusement. They have no idea what these humans have become. Kane's intelligence network had finally identified the source of the attacks, a research station that officially did not exist, operating in deep space beyond any charted system. The 50 humans aboard had been conducting psychological and biological warfare research for years, disguising their work as cultural studies while preparing for exactly this scenario. They were ready for us, Kane realized with growing horror. The humans spend decades studying how to destroy other species while pretending to seek peaceful cooperation. He pulled up files that his intelligence teams had recovered from human databases. Every cultural exchange, every diplomatic meeting, every piece of information they gathered about alien biology and psychology was preparation for this war. The discovery that humanity's peaceful nature had been at least partially an act shocked the hegemony leadership to its core. The species they had dismissed as weak and naive had been secretly developing the tools necessary to wage total war against any enemy, while maintaining the appearance of harmless academics and artists. Dr. Marcus Webb's psychological profile, recovered from human databases, painted a picture of a being who understood warfare at a level that terrified species bred for conquest. His published papers on xenobiology contained insights that could be used to develop weapons capable of targeting any known species with surgical precision. They made us believe they were harmless, Kane said, staring at Webb's academic credentials. While we were preparing to conquer them through superior force, they were learning exactly how to unmake us at the cellular and psychological level. He paused, feeling something the species had never evolved to experience, genuine fear of a weaker opponent. The most disturbing intelligence came from intercepted human communications. The 50 survivors were not seeking to rebuild their civilization or find some way to coexist with their enemies. Their goals had become much simpler and infinitely more terrifying. They wanted to make the hegemony suffer in ways that would serve as a warning to the entire galaxy. They are not trying to win a war, General Vex observed after analyzing the communications. They are trying to demonstrate what happens when you cross a line that should never be crossed. He looked at Kane with eyes that reflected a new understanding. We did not just commit genocide. We created something that the galaxy has never seen before. Kane stood alone in his command center, surrounded by reports of installations going silent, troops requesting psychiatric treatment, and weapons that turned biology itself into an instrument of precise torture. For the first time in his life, the overlord who had conquered worlds felt genuinely afraid of an enemy he could not see, could not predict, and could not understand. The humans had stopped being human, and what they had become was worse than any nightmare his species had ever imagined. 2 years after the genocide that was supposed to end humanity forever, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from across hegemony space describing a collapse so complete that even hardened military observers struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. The 6 species that had once controlled a quarter of the galaxy were now begging for intervention from the same council they had ignored during humanity's extinction. Ambassador Reed materialized on the main communication screen, but the being that appeared bore little resemblance to the gentle diplomat who had once offered art and music to his enemies. His body had been enhanced with alien technology stolen from a dozen different species, creating something that was neither fully human nor entirely machine. His eyes glowed with an inner light that hurt to look at directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that triggered fear responses in every species that heard it. "Honor, council members," Reed said, his tone carrying mockery that made the translated words sound like threats. "I understand you wish to discuss the situation in former hegemony territory. How thoughtful of you to finally take an interest in genocide and its consequences." Council Speaker Tau, an ancient being whose species had mediated galactic conflicts for millennia, struggled to maintain diplomatic protocol in the face of what Reed had become. "Ambassador Reed, the Council extends its sympathy for the losses suffered by humanity, and we wish to discuss terms for ending the current hostilities." Reed's laughter was a sound that several council members would later require psychological treatment to forget. "Sympathy," he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. "You watched 8 billion humans die and call it acceptable losses in a territorial dispute. Now you offer sympathy because the hegemony is experiencing some discomfort." The discomfort Reed referred to was a complete psychological and biological breakdown of 6 entire species. The hegemony's aggressive expansion had stopped 18 months earlier, when their soldiers became physically unable to function in combat situations. Their warrior culture had collapsed under the weight of genetically induced empathy that made violence literally painful for beings bred for conquest. The nanobots you deployed violate every treaty regarding biological warfare, Councilmember Deck stated, his crystalline form flickering with diplomatic indignation. "The modifications you have made to sentient beings constitute crimes against consciousness itself." Reed's enhanced features showed amusement at the accusation. "Crimes against consciousness," he repeated slowly. "How interesting that you develop moral standards only when they protect your friends." The communication screen shifted to show footage from the genocide, images of human children being tortured while galactic observers took notes for their historical records. Where were these moral standards when they were needed? Dr. Marcus Webb appeared beside Reed, his form even more heavily modified than his diplomatic colleague. The enhancements were not merely technological but biological, incorporating genetic material from dozens of species to create something that could survive in any environment and process information at superhuman speeds. His research into alien biology had become literally part of his own cellular structure. "The Council wishes to negotiate," Webb said, his voice carrying the same harmonic thread as Reed's. "But you misunderstand our nature and our goals. We are not a government seeking territory or a military force pursuing victory." He paused, allowing his word to register with the assembled delegates. "We are the consequence of your decision to permit genocide. We are what humans become when humanity is dead." The truth that Webb spoke was more terrifying than any conventional threat. The 50 survivors had not merely developed new weapons or tactics. They had evolved beyond the species that had created them. Their consciousness existed in a distributed network that made them effectively immortal, their knowledge growing with each passing day as they incorporated technology and biological systems from every species they encountered. Captain Lisa Stone's image joined the others, her form so heavily modified that only her voice remained recognizably human. "The hegemony begged us to stop," she reported with satisfaction that chilled the council chamber. "They offered surrender, reparations, anything we wanted if we would just allow them to die quickly." Her smile was a predatory expression that belonged on no sentient face. "We declined their generous offer." The hegemony's collapse had taken 18 months to complete, but the process had been a masterwork of calculated cruelty that demonstrated what human creativity could accomplish when freed from moral constraints. Each species had been targeted with weapons designed specifically to exploit their deepest evolutionary fears and biological vulnerabilities. Kane's people now experience physical pain when they attempt violence, Webb explained to the horrified council. Their enhanced nervous systems, once their greatest advantage, have been reprogrammed to make aggression literally unbearable. They remain conscious and aware, but they can no longer function as the predators they were designed to be. The insectoid species had suffered a different fate. Their hive mind consciousness had been fragmented, forcing millions of beings to experience individuality for the first time in their evolutionary history. The psychological trauma of sudden self-awareness had driven entire colonies to madness, while their collective intelligence collapsed into chaos. The reptilian species developed what your medical teams call empathy syndrome. Stone continued, her report delivered with clinical detachment. They can now feel the pain of every being they have ever harmed, experienced simultaneously and continuously. Most have chosen suicide rather than endure the accumulated suffering they inflicted on others during their conquests. Council Speaker Tao struggled to process the implications of what he was hearing. These modifications, these weapons you have created, they represent a level of biological manipulation that threatens every species in the galaxy. His ancient voice carried a tremor of fear that had not been present in thousands of years. If you possess the ability to rewrite consciousness itself, then no civilization is safe from your revenge. Reed's response was immediate and terrifying in its simplicity. No, civilization is safe, he agreed. That is exactly the point we wish to make. The communication screen displayed star charts showing the current distribution of galactic species, with human modification spreading slowly but inevitably beyond former hegemony territory. We have learned so much about biology and psychology over the past 2 years. It would be wasteful not to share our knowledge. The nanobots that had destroyed the hegemony were already spreading through galactic trade routes, carried by merchants and diplomats who had no idea they were infected with microscopic weapons that could remain dormant for decades. The humans had designed a plague of consciousness that could activate anywhere, anytime, transforming entire species according to carefully programmed modifications. You cannot destroy the galaxy out of revenge for your losses, Councilmember Vox protested, her energy form fluctuating with distress. Genocide cannot justify genocide, no matter how sophisticated your methods. Webb's laugh was a sound that violated the harmonic frequencies most species use for communication. Genocide, he repeated, as if the word amused him. We are not committing genocide. We are improving you, evolving you beyond your current limitations. His enhanced eyes focus on the council with predatory intensity. We are giving every species a gift of experiencing the consequences of their choices. The modifications were indeed more sophisticated than simple extermination. Each species would be changed according to their role in permitting humanity's destruction. Those who had actively supported the hegemony would experience the same suffering they had inflicted. Those who had remained neutral would develop an inability to ignore suffering in others. Those who had protested the genocide would be enhanced rather than punished. The galaxy chose to let our children burn, Reed said, his voice carrying the weight of 8 billion dead humans. Now the galaxy will learn what it feels like to care about children burning, to experience empathy as a physical sensation, to understand that every action has consequences that extend beyond immediate self-interest. Council Speaker Tao made one final attempt at negotiation. What do you want from us? What would it take for you to stop this campaign and allow the galaxy to heal from these conflicts? The silence that followed lasted for nearly a minute, as the three enhanced humans considered the question. When Reed finally responded, his words carried a finality that ended any hope of peaceful resolution. You ask what we want, he said slowly. We wanted our families to live. We wanted our civilization to continue. We wanted the galaxy to be a place where art and music and beauty had value. He paused, his enhanced features showing an expression of infinite sadness and infinite rage. Since we cannot have what we wanted, we will ensure that everyone understands the price of taking it from us. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the Galactic Council alone with the knowledge that they face an enemy that could not be defeated, negotiated with, or reasoned with. The humans had become something beyond the reach of conventional warfare or diplomacy, a force of nature that existed solely to demonstrate the consequences of crossing certain lines. Webb's final transmission reached every species in the galaxy simultaneously, broadcast on frequencies that bypassed all security systems and communication protocols. His message was simple and absolute. We are the 47 billion humans who died screaming while you watched and did nothing. We are the consequences of your choice to permit genocide. We are what you created when you decided that mercy was weakness and civilization was negotiable. The galaxy would spend the next century learning exactly what those consequences meant, as species after species discovered that the monsters they had helped create were patient, creative, and absolutely committed to ensuring that no one would ever again mistake human restraint for human weakness. The last humans in the galaxy had kept their promise. They had shown everyone exactly what humans become when they stop pretending to be civilized, and the lesson would be remembered for as long as consciousness existed among the stars.